The train doors closed incessantly. No, let me write this properly. The ferry didn't wait for anyone. Rowan Adler knew this. She had taken the 7:15 crossing from Sawasan to Swartz Bay exactly 41 times in the last 2 years, and not once had BC ferries held departure for a single soul. She knew this the way she knew her own heartbeat. And yet there she was, sprinting across the terminal parking lot in November rain, her tote bag swinging wildly, her interview folder pressed against her chest like something worth protecting, watching the gangway retract through the glass doors as if it were happening in slow motion. She stopped. Just stopped right there in the middle of the walkway, rain hitting her shoulders, while a man in a yellow vest offered her the most sympathetic look she had ever received from a complete stranger. "Next one's at 9:10, he said. 9:10. Her interview was at 9. Rowan stood there for what felt like a very long time. The folder in her hand had her name on the tab. Rowan Adler, Hospital Foundation, Development Officer position, printed in the careful font she used when she wanted to seem like someone who had her life together. She had printed 6 copies the night before at the FedEx on Douglas Street. She had ironed her blazer. She had set 3 alarms. The rain didn't care about any of that. She turned around and walked to the terminal bench, sat down, and took one very slow breath. Her phone said 7:17. She'd been 2 minutes late to the lot. 2 minutes. The entire thing had come apart because of 2 minutes and a transit bus that had decided somewhere between Shelburne and Feltham that the schedule was more of a suggestion. "Okay," she said to herself very quietly. "Okay." She was talking to no one. Or possibly to the folder. It was hard to say. Rowan had been in Victoria for 14 months, which was long enough to love the city and not quite long enough to stop feeling like a visitor. She had come for a relationship that had ended 8 months ago. Amicably, she always said, which was code for sadly but without drama, and had stayed because she had a part-time contract with a non-profit that paid just enough to make leaving feel irresponsible. The development officer position at the Hospital Foundation was the job. The one she had applied for twice before and been shortlisted for once and not slept properly since Thursday thinking about. The 9:10 ferry would get her to the mainland at 11. The interview was at 9. She pulled out her phone and found the name of the hiring manager, a woman named Patricia Chow, and typed a message she rewrote 4 times. She settled on, "I want to let you know I missed the 7:15 ferry due to a transit delay and won't be able to make it by 9. I understand completely if this can't be rescheduled. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience." She read it twice, added a period, deleted the period, sent it. Then she put her phone face down on her knee and looked at the water. The terminal was quieter now that the ferry had gone. A few travelers with luggage, a man with a coffee thermos, a little boy, maybe 4 years old, maybe 5, standing near the vending machines about 20 feet away, wearing a green raincoat that was slightly too big for him, looking at the gap between the vending machine and the wall with the intense focus that small children give to things that seem important only to them. Rowan watched him for a moment. He didn't move, he didn't look around for anyone, he was just staring at the gap. She waited for a parent to appear. A minute passed. Nobody came. The boy crouched down and peered into the gap between the machine and the wall, then made a sound, not crying, more like a soft, distressed hum, and sat down directly on the floor. Rowan stood up. She crossed the distance between them and crouched down to his level. "Hey there, you okay?" The boy looked up at her. His eyes were very round and very brown and quite wet. Though he wasn't quite crying yet, he was in the stage that comes just before, the stage where the decision to cry or not cry is still being made. "My truck," he said. Rowan looked at the gap. Sure enough, about 6 inches back in the dark between the machine and the wall, there was a small orange dump truck. "Ah," she said. "Did it roll back there?" He nodded gravely. "Okay, let me see what I can do." She set down her folder, reached into her tote, and found, after some searching, a collapsible umbrella. She extended it, angled it carefully, and after about 45 seconds of maneuvering that the boy watched with the concentration of someone watching a surgical procedure, she hooked the truck's axle and pulled it out. The boy's face transformed. He grabbed the truck with both hands and held it to his chest. "There you go," Rowan said. "Thank you," he said, very formally, the way children do when they're repeating exactly what they've been taught to say. She smiled. "You're welcome. Where's your Oliver?" The voice came from behind her, slightly breathless. "Oliver, I told you to stay." Rowan turned around. The man standing there was tall, dark-coated, carrying a travel mug and a laptop bag, and wearing the expression of someone who had just experienced 5 very bad seconds. He was looking at the boy with the particular combination of relief and exasperation that belonged specifically to parents of young children. Late 30s, maybe 40. Dark hair going slightly gray at the temples. He had the look of someone who was usually composed and was currently, temporarily, not. "He dropped his truck," Rowan said, standing up. "It went behind the machine. I got it out." The man looked at her, then at Oliver, then back at her. "Thank you. He was right beside me, and then I turned around for literally 30 seconds. "It happens," Rowan said. "He's fine." Oliver held up the truck to show his father. "She got it with her umbrella." "That's very resourceful," the man said. He crouched down and took Oliver's hand. "What do we say?" "I already said thank you," Oliver said, with some dignity. The man looked up at Rowan and she could see him almost smile, just at the edges. "He did, didn't he?" "He did, very properly." She picked up her folder. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She already knew it was Patricia Chow telling her the interview slot was filled. "You waiting for the 9:10, the man asked. "I missed the 7:15, she said. "Interview on the mainland. The bus was late and then..." She stopped herself. "Anyway, what time was your interview?" 9. He looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry, it is what it is." She said this in the tone of someone who did not yet fully believe it. "It's fine." It was not fine. Her bank account had been at $412 for the past 6 days, which was not an emergency only if she did not think too carefully about rent. She had been living on contract work and optimism for 8 months. The foundation position came with a salary, benefits, a team, a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just stubbornness. She sat back down on the bench and looked at her phone. Patricia Chow had replied in 3 minutes. "Rowan, thank you for letting me know. I completely understand. These things happen. I've left a note in your file. Please do reach out when you'd like to reconnect," which was kind, which was also the polite way of saying, "Not today." Rowan put the phone away and watched the water. Oliver and his father had settled at the far end of the bench row, the boy running his truck along the armrest with soft truck sounds. After a few minutes, the man sat down 1 seat away from Rowan. She wasn't sure if this was deliberate or just proximity. "I'm Marcus," he said, and then seemed to catch himself. "Sorry. You probably don't want to." "Rowan," she said, "and I don't mind." He nodded. They sat in silence for a minute, which was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the particular kind of quiet that exists between strangers in a waiting room who have silently agreed not to perform pleasantness at each other. "Development work," he said, glancing at her folder. She looked down. The label was visible. She was briefly embarrassed by how organized she had tried to be. "Hospital Foundation, fundraising, donor relations." "What do you do?" "Healthcare," he said. And then, after a beat, administration sighed. She nodded. They lapsed back into silence. Oliver's truck fell off the armrest and clattered on the floor, and he retrieved it and resumed. The departure board updated. 8:12, 8:13. "Did you have far to come this morning?" Marcus asked. "James Bay." "You, Oak Bay." "Long way to the terminal from Oak Bay," she said. "Oliver wanted to see the ferries." "We try to." He paused. "His mother passed away last year. We try to have Saturday mornings be something he looks forward to." Rowan looked at Oliver. He was making the truck climb the arm of the seat now, narrating very quietly to himself. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it, simply without trying to make it more than it was. Marcus looked at the water. "Thank you." That was all, and it was enough, the way some things are enough when they're said plainly. At 9:47, Oliver fell asleep leaning against his father's arm, the orange truck still clutched in both hands. At 9:10, the ferry came in, the horn low and enormous in the gray air, and the passengers began to queue. Marcus gathered Oliver carefully, the boy limp and trusting the way sleeping children are, and stood. "I hope they call you back," he said to Rowan. "Maybe," she said. She gathered her bag and her folder. Safe crossing. She didn't think about him again on the boat. She thought about the interview, about Patricia Chow's careful reply, about whether she should call the foundation on Monday or give it a week. She bought a coffee from the cafeteria and stood at the bow deck despite the cold, because the Gulf Islands were beautiful in November in a way that felt almost unfair. She was sad in a very contained, manageable way, the kind of sad that has a shape and doesn't overflow. She was good at that. She had been good at it for a while. She forgot his name by the time the ferry docked. The call came on a Wednesday, 11 days later. Rowan was at her desk in the small spare room she used as an office, updating a donor database for the environmental nonprofit, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Victoria Exchange. "Is this Rowan Adler?" A woman's voice, warm and professional. "It is. This is Genevieve Hartwell. I'm the executive director at the Sinclair Family Foundation. I was given your name as a referral for a contract position we're looking to fill, project lead on a capital campaign. It's 3 months to start, with a likelihood of extension. Do you have a moment?" Rowan's pen stopped moving. "Yes," she said. "I have a moment." The Sinclair Foundation, Genevieve explained, supported children's health care across BC. They had just concluded a significant gift negotiation, a naming gift for a new pediatric wing at a hospital in Vancouver, and they needed someone with strong donor relations experience to manage the campaign communications and stewardship for the next phase. The previous project lead had taken a leave of absence unexpectedly. They needed someone who could start quickly and work with a small, already functioning team. "How did you find me?" Rowan asked, a brief pause. "I'll be honest, I had a colleague mention your name. Someone who had come across your work. I can't say more than that just now, but if you're interested, I'd love to have a proper call this week." Rowan said yes. She spent the next 4 days preparing in a way that could charitably be called thorough and honestly be called obsessive. She researched the Foundation's past campaigns, read their annual reports, made notes in the margins of printed pages like a person who still believed in margins. She rewrote her project summary 3 times. She borrowed a better blazer from her friend Deandra because she was going to be on video, and her own blazer had developed a small, unexplained pulling at the shoulder. The interview was on a Friday. It went well. She knew it went well the way you sometimes know, not from arrogance but from the feeling of the conversation moving forward of its own momentum rather than having to be dragged. Genevieve was sharp and direct and asked good questions and laughed genuinely when Rowan said something that was meant to be slightly funny, but she hadn't been sure if it landed. The offer came the following Tuesday. It was more than she had hoped. She accepted before she closed the email. She celebrated by ordering Thai food and calling her mother in Calgary, who cried a little, which she had expected. Her first day at the Sinclair Foundation was the first Monday of December. The office was in a heritage building in Yaletown with tall windows and wood floors, and the kind of small team energy that either worked beautifully or was absolutely claustrophobic, and it became clear within the first hour that in this case it worked beautifully. Genevieve introduced her to the 3-person team, a communications coordinator named Betta, a data analyst named Roland, and the board liaison, a woman named Josephine who had worked there for 9 years and knew where everything was, literally and figuratively. At 11, Genevieve knocked on the open door of the small office Rowan had been given. "The Foundation's primary donor for the pediatric wing campaign would like to meet you," she said. "He stops in occasionally. He's on the board, technically, though he doesn't often sit in on full meetings. He likes to stay close to the work." "Of course," Rowan said. She closed her laptop and straightened her notes. Genevieve led her down the hallway to the small boardroom at the end, a room with a long table for 8 and a window overlooking the street. There was a man standing at the window with his back to the door, and a small boy sitting at the table drawing on a piece of paper with a felt pen, very focused, his tongue slightly between his teeth. The boy looked up first. Rowan stopped in the doorway. Oliver's face went through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Then he pointed at her. "You're the umbrella lady." The man turned from the window. She had forgotten his name. She had not forgotten his face, not completely. She knew it in the way you know a place you've visited once. The general shape of it, the feeling more than the detail. But now, standing in the doorway of the Sinclair Family Foundation boardroom, she understood, with the particular slow horror of a person putting together a puzzle, that Marcus from the ferry terminal was standing in front of her in a very good suit and looking at her with an expression of pure, unguarded surprise. "Mr. Sinclair," Genevieve said, "this is Rowan Adler, our new project lead. Marcus Sinclair, the Sinclair Family Foundation, the pediatric wing." She had read his name 14 times in the annual reports, and it had not once connected itself to the man on the bench, because she had not known his last name, and also because her brain had apparently decided to store him in an entirely different folder. "We've met," Marcus said. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, some combination of recognition and something else, something quieter. "The ferry," Rowan said. "Yes. She got my truck," Oliver informed Genevieve, who looked between them with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to ask questions she doesn't need the answers to just yet. "The umbrella," Rowan said. "It rolled behind a vending machine." "I remember," Marcus said, a pause, not uncomfortable. More like the space between one sentence and the next. "It's very good to meet you properly," he said. "And you," she said, and meant it. The campaign work was real work, the kind that expanded to fill the time available and then kept going. Rowan drafted donor stewardship plans and reviewed naming gift acknowledgments and sat in on meetings with the communications team and learned, gradually, how the foundation moved and what it cared about and where its gaps were. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. That was the strange and steady comfort of competency. It didn't require you to feel confident to function. Marcus came into the office once a week, sometimes twice. He never stayed long. He brought Oliver on Saturdays when the office was quiet and the boy would draw at the boardroom table or read in the armchair in the hallway corner that seemed to exist specifically for that purpose. Rowan would sometimes be in doing weekend work. She was a person who did weekend work, and she and Oliver developed a habit of brief, serious conversations about whatever he was currently interested in, which in December was deep-sea creatures. "The anglerfish makes its own light," Oliver told her one Saturday, not looking up from a book with a blue cover. "So it can find things in the dark. That seems very useful," Rowan said. "It's bioluminescence," he said the word carefully, giving it its full syllables. "Do you know any other animals that do that?" He listed 6. She listened to all of them. Marcus had appeared in the doorway at some point during the list, and when she looked up he was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed and an expression that was doing something careful with itself, like it was trying not to become more than it was supposed to be. She looked back at Oliver. "And what about jellyfish?" "Some of them," Oliver confirmed, "the crystal ones. There was a man named Vincent Craw on the foundation board who had been there for 4 years and who Rowan had identified, within her first week, as a problem. Not dramatically, not in an obvious way, he was too careful for that. He was smooth in meetings, collegial in the hallway, always available to offer a helpful observation that subtly redirected credit and quietly undercut. She had worked with people like him before, she knew how they moved. He began in her 3rd week to question her methodology. In board communications, in email chains copied to Genevieve and Marcus, with a particular framing of someone who claimed to have concerns rather than objections. "I just want to make sure we're aligned on the approach," he wrote. "I'm not sure the stewardship timeline accounts for the donor's communication preferences." He CC'd Marcus on everything. He used words like oversight and due diligence in ways that looked like governance and functioned like doubt. Rowan documented everything. She had learned this early, not from cynicism but from experience. She kept dated notes in a file on her desktop labeled simply reference. She kept original drafts of documents. She kept email threads undeleted. In week 4, a meeting was called Foundation Leadership, Board Representatives, Rowan, ostensibly to review the campaign timeline. She walked in and found Vincent already there, with a printed packet in front of each chair. She picked hers up. It was a summary of the campaign communications plan with several sections highlighted in yellow, followed by a memo, authored by Vincent. She noted from the header, suggesting that the plan showed a lack of familiarity with the Foundation's established donor protocols and recommended a review of Rowan's role before the next phase. Genevieve looked at the packet with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral. Marcus arrived 2 minutes late. He sat at the end of the table, looked down at the packet, read the first page, and turned to look at Rowan. She held his gaze. "Before we begin," Marcus said to the table, "I'd like to understand the origin of this document." He looked at Vincent. "Did you send this to Genevieve before the meeting?" "I thought it was more appropriate to present it." "So that's a no." Marcus set the packet down. He had the voice of someone who did not raise it when he was making a serious point, which made the serious points land harder. "Rowan, did you receive a copy of this before today?" "I did not," she said. "I see." Marcus looked at the packet again. "I'll need some time to review this properly before we discuss it. So let's set it aside for today and speak to the actual campaign timeline, which is what this meeting was scheduled to address." Vincent adjusted in his chair. "Marcus, I think the concerns are..." "Vincent." Marcus looked at him directly. "I've reviewed the campaign plan. I've also reviewed the stewardship correspondence, the donor file notes, and the timeline. I did this on Thursday." He said this the way a person states a fact. "I have no concerns." He looked around the table. "Does anyone else have concerns about the campaign plan as it stands?" A pause. "No," said the board treasurer, a woman named Claudette. "Good," Marcus said. "Let's proceed." After the meeting, when the room had cleared, Rowan gathered her things. She was the last one out. Marcus was waiting in the hallway, his coat already on, Oliver's hand in his. "I keep the original documents," she said quietly, before he could speak. "I know," he said. "How?" "Because it's what someone careful does." He looked at her for a moment. "And because I'd already looked." She nodded. "You investigated before the meeting. I like to know what I'm walking into," he said. He shifted Oliver's hand to his other side. "For what it's worth, the donor called me last week. He said the stewardship has been excellent." Those were his words. She let out a slow breath. "That's good to know." "It is." He looked at her steadily. "I know this is uncomfortable having a board member step in like this. I want you to know it wasn't because I thought you needed rescuing." "Then why?" "Because what Vincent did was wrong." He said it simply. "And someone should say so." She looked at him for a long moment. Oliver tugged at his sleeve and Marcus glanced down and then back up at her. "Thank you," she said. "Of course." Vincent Craw submitted a letter of resignation 3 weeks later, citing personal commitments requiring his full attention. The board accepted it politely at their January meeting. The letter used the word "stepping back" twice and the word "grateful" 4 times. Rowan read the announcement in an email from Genevieve and then closed it and went back to the donor acknowledgement she had been drafting. She did not feel like she had won. She felt like the ground had become slightly more solid under her feet. That was different and better. It was a Thursday in February when Marcus knocked on the open door of her office at the end of the afternoon, after everyone else had gone. Oliver was with a grandparent for the night, he said, which he offered as explanation, and then seemed to catch himself on the word. "I was going to walk down to the water," he said, "if you haven't already left." She had been about to leave. She said yes. They walked to the seawall, which at 5:30 in February was cold and nearly empty. The sky doing something complicated with pink and gray over the North Shore Mountains. They walked at the pace of people who are not trying to get anywhere in particular. "I owe you an explanation," Marcus said after a little while. "You don't owe me anything, the referral," he said. "To Genevieve, that was me." Rowan stopped walking. He stopped a step later and turned to face her. "The day at the ferry terminal," he said. "You had the hospital foundation folder. I saw the label. I know Patricia Chow. We're on a committee together. I called her the following week and asked about you. She said you'd been shortlisted twice and were excellent." He paused. "When our project lead took a leave and Genevieve was looking, I mentioned your name." She looked at him. The wind off the water was cold and direct. "You could have told me," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd want the position if you knew the connection," he said. "I thought if you interviewed on your own merit, you'd know the offer was real. And if I'd found out later, I hoped you'd understand the intention." She was quiet for a moment. The mountains were going dark blue across the water. "You could have introduced yourself properly on the ferry." "You just said Marcus." "I know." There was something self-aware in his expression, slightly rueful. "I do that sometimes. Leave things out that I should say." "What else are you leaving out?" She said it lightly, but she meant it as a real question. He looked at her for a long time, in the way of someone deciding something. "I think about you more than is professionally appropriate," he said. "I have for a while, since the ferry, actually. I know that's a strange thing to say." The water moved. A seagull landed on the railing and regarded them with complete indifference. Rowan looked at him. He was nervous, genuinely, not performatively. She found she liked him better for it. "Oliver told me last week," she said slowly, "that the anglerfish makes its own light so it can find things in the dark." Marcus waited. "I was thinking about that," she said. "About how sometimes things that seem strange are actually just useful. For finding things." He looked at her for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "That's a very oblique response. I'm cautious," she said. "I keep original documents." He laughed, a real one, the kind that changes a person's whole face. She had seen it before once at the ferry terminal, and she had not forgotten it as completely as she had thought. "Coffee," he said. "Saturday morning. Oliver included. If that's all right, he'll be upset if I don't." "Oliver is excellent company," she said. And yes, they walked back along the seawall as the light finished falling out of the sky. They didn't say very much. They didn't need to. There was a comfortable kind of quiet between them that Rowan recognized as something rare, something that takes time to build. Except that somehow it had already started building without either of them quite noticing. Somewhere between a bench at a ferry terminal and a vending machine and an orange truck, and a word like bioluminescence said carefully, with all its syllables. On Saturday morning, Oliver had already decided she was his best idea, and by 10 o'clock he had told her 6 facts about orcas and asked if she would teach him to use an umbrella as a retrieval tool, because he had plans. Rowan said yes to that too. And somewhere, without a lot of ceremony, without anyone announcing it, a new thing began.